Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for not being there in person. I would have loved to do that, but I'm still in the COVID age, and it's wonderful that by electronics, I can give this talk. So if I can have the first slide, and I'd like to thank Dr. Shakora and Manuela for making this electronically possible. My assignment is to talk about writing the technique section that's unique to a surgical manuscript. Next slide, please. I have no conflicts of interest. Slide, please. Well, a standard paper format has the following sections, and every reviewer from a magazine will look at that: abstract, introduction, methods, and that's where we have the technique, results, discussion, summary, plus or minus a conclusion, and references. Next slide, please. Now, next slide, please. The methods section has some general principles. The method section presents the basis for the entire manuscript results. It has to be accurate. It's written to be duplicated by a trained practitioner. It's a how to do it. It's clear, transparent, and literary. There's nothing hidden with respect to steps, details, special considerations. Now, if it's wholly or partially founded on a prior published method, credit the predecessor in the text and by a reference. Don't try to change words per se to make it sound like it's not plagiarism. It's not plagiarism. If you say 2 teaspoons and then you want to convert it to ounces, that makes no sense. Leave it the way it is, but make sure you credit the original author. If it's yourself, credit yourself. Next slide, please. And the general principles for a technique portion of the methods section are just about the same. It's got to present the basis for the entire clinical outcomes. It has to be duplicated by a trained practitioner. It's a how-to, nothing is hidden, and above all, give creditation. Next slide. Now, for a technique section, there are usually, almost always, illustrations. And the types of illustrations are line drawings of the procedure. They can be in black and white or in color. And this could be a step-by-step detailing or an explanatory diagram. Another alternative is photographs of the operative procedure, again, by step-by-step detailing or end result illustration. Next slide, please. Let me show these to you. Now, this is a sleeve gastrectomy, the procedure most of you are doing at this time. And this shows a step-by-step. Take down the omentum, go up the greater curvature side of the stomach with the stapler, oversew the staple line. I always oversew my staple lines, and the final result. Next slide. Now, this shows, again, a sleeve gastrectomy, but in diagrammatic form. It shows, labeled by alphabet A, B, C, D, shows critical distances, like A, 1 to 2 centimeters of the distance of the sleeve transection from the esophageal gastric junction. And it ends up by giving a V or a volume. So that's the other format. Next slide. And this is the same thing in pictures. You show an actual picture from a laparoscopic video, and then actually you translate it down into a diagram. Next slide. So now that you have the illustration, you have to label this illustration. Now, the labeling has to be clear, but limited with inside the illustration itself. You can't burden the illustration with a lot of words. So label the anatomic parts, cecum, ileum, so on. Use the alphabet to explain further what you will explain in the figure legend, and use abbreviations. The detailed figure legend shows what does the figure show. It shows the anatomic parts, explains the alphabet steps, and defines fully all abbreviations. So the two go together. You need the actual picture or drawing or photograph, and then the legend underneath it, which starts off, this figure shows so and so, and A is so and so and so and so. Next slide, please. Now let's look at types of a technique paper. A new technique, a new purpose. Well, in 1962, Richard Varco and I came up with the partial ileal bypass for hyperlipidemia. Next slide. And we published 2 different illustrations in 2 different journals. You can see on the left is something with the alphabet A, B, and C, the first step, dividing the bowel 200 centimeters from the ileocecal valve. B is the anastomosis of the proximal bowel to the anterior tinea of the cecum, and C is closing the mesenteric defects. And we published another one, which was a line drawing done by an excellent artist, which had steps 1, 2, 3, 4 in the middle, 5, 6, essentially the same thing, but a step by step. And together with the text, this told you how to do it. Next slide. Now, a technique paper can be a new technique for an established purpose. Next slide. And this would be the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. The original gastric bypass by Mason was not a Roux-en-Y. This was added by Porres and by Griffin. And so here you show what it looks like. It's something new for people to look at. Next slide. And then there's a modification of a standard procedure. Let's say the SADI-1. Next slide. And here again, I go back to a diagram. It shows the various dimensions for A, B, C, D, and finally the volume of a sleeve. And this again is a modification of a SADI-1. Next slide, please. And so this is my final slide. Now, what's the purpose of a surgical technique paper? Why do you write these? It benefits humankind. That's the goal of medicine. It makes operative therapy safer, quicker, more effective, produces less side effects and complications. That's every good surgeon's goal. It enhances the discipline of surgery. For instance, broadening the application of metabolic surgery, something I'm going to talk about tomorrow, using metabolic bariatric surgery for traumatic brain injury, a new use of our metabolic techniques. And finally, let's not forget, provide the author with reputation, glory, and money. That's the personal goal. Well, I thank you very, very much for listening, and I apologize for not being there in person.